Section 16 of Thoughts on Art and Life. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Avai in September 2016. Thoughts on Art and Life by Leonardo da Vinci. Translated by Maurice Baring and edited by Louis Einstein. Thoughts on Science, Part 4. From Known to Unknown. 89. In order to arrive at knowledge of the motions of birds in the air, it is first necessary to acquire knowledge of the winds, which we will prove by the motions of water in itself, and this knowledge will be a step enabling us to arrive at the knowledge of beings that fly between the air and the wind. On the flight of birds. 90. The reason of this is that small birds being without down cannot support the intense cold of the high altitudes in which the vultures and eagles and other great birds, well supplied with down and clothed with many kinds of feathers, fly. Again, the small birds, having delicate and thin wings, support themselves in the low air, which is denser, and they could not bear up in the rarer air, which affords slighter resistance. On the structure of wings. 91. The shafts formed in the shoulders of the wings of birds have been so devised by ingenious nature as to occasion a convenient pliancy in the direct impetus which often occurs in the swift flight of birds, since she found it more practical to bend a small part of the wing in the direct flight than the whole of it. On a fossil fish. 92. O time, swift devourer of all created things! How many kings, how many nations thou hast overthrown, how great changes of kingdoms and diverse vicissitudes have succeeded one another, since the marvellous body of this fish, which perished in the caverns and intricate recesses of the mountain. Now undone by time, thou liest patient in this confined spot, with thy fleshless and bare bones thou hast built the framework and the support of the mountain that is above thee. We live by others' death. 93. Unconscious life remains in what is dead, which, when reunited to the stomach of living men, reacquires sentient and conscious life. Against doctors. 94. Men are chosen to be physicians in order to minister to diseases of which they are ignorant. 95. Every man wishes to amass money in order to give it to the physicians who are the destroyers of life. They ought therefore to be rich. 96. Take pains to preserve thy health. And thou wilt all the more easily do this if thou avoidest physicians, because their drugs are a kind of alchemy, and there are as many books on this subject as there are on medicine. Against the seekers of perpetual motion. 97. O meditators on perpetual motion, how many vain projects of similar character you have devised! Go and join the seekers of gold. 98. The water which flows in a river moves either because it is summoned or driven, or because it moves of its own accord. If it is summoned, and I mean sought after, who is the seeker? If it is driven, who is the driver? If it moves of its own accord, it gives evidence of reasoning, and reasoning in bodies which continually change their shape is impossible, because in such bodies there is no consciousness. Against occult sciences. 99. I wish to work miracles. I may have less than other and less energetic men, and those who wish to grow rich in a day live a long time in great poverty, as happens, and will always happen, to alchemists, who seek to make gold and silver, and to the engineers who wish from still water to obtain life and perpetual motion, and to the supreme fool, the necromancer and the magician. Of astrology. 100. There is no part of astronomy which does not depend on the visual lines and on perspective, the daughter of painting. Because the painter is he who, by the necessity of his art, has begotten perspective, and it is impossible to do without lines which include all the various figures of the bodies begotten by nature, and without which the art of geometry is blind. And while the geometrist reduces every surface surrounded by lines to a square, and each body to the figure of the cube, and mathematics do the same with their cube roots and square roots, these two sciences deal only with the continuous and discontinuous quantity, but they do not deal with the quality which constitutes the beauty of the works of nature and the ornament of the world. 101. Here the adversary will say that he does not want so much knowledge, and the mere skill of depicting nature will suffice him. To which I make reply that there is no greater error than to trust to our judgment without other reasoning, as experience, the enemy of alchemists, necromancers, and other foolish intellects, has in all times proved. Against alchemists. 102. The lying interpreters of nature affirm that quicksilver is the common seed of all metals. They do not bear in mind that nature raises substances according to the diversity of things which she wishes to produce in the world. Against necromancy. 103. The belief in necromancy is reputed to be the most foolish of all human opinions. It is the sister of alchemy which gives birth to simple and natural things, but it is all the more reprehensible than alchemy, inasmuch as it brings forth nothing but what is like itself, that is, lies. This is not the case with alchemy, which is confined to the simple products of nature, and whose function cannot be performed by nature herself, because in it there are no organic instruments with which it can work, such as the hands are to man, and which have enabled him to make glass, etc. But necromancy, the flag and flying banner, blown hither and thither by the winds, is the guide of the silly multitude, which constantly bears witness with gaping wonder to the countless effects of this art. And whole books are written which declare that incantations and spirits are efficacious and speak without tongues and without vocal organs, without which it is impossible to speak, and carry the heaviest weights, raising tempests and rain, and transforming men into cats, wolves, and other beasts, although they who affirm such things are the first to be transformed into beasts. And certainly if such necromancy existed, as is believed by lower intellects, there is nothing on the earth which would be so effectual both as regards the service and detriment of man, because if it is true that this art has the power to disturb the calm serenity of the atmosphere, changing it into night, and producing sparks and winds, with fearful thunder and lightnings that fly through the darkness, and overthrowing high buildings with violent winds, and uprooting forests, and striking armies, and shattering and overwhelming them, and producing, in addition to this, devastating storms which rob the peasants of the fruits of their toil, what kind of warfare is there so deadly to the enemy? Who in naval warfare can be compared with him who commands the winds and generates storms which ruin and sink any fleet whatsoever? Certainly he who could dispose of such violent forces would be the lord of nations, and no human skill could resist his deadly power. The hidden treasures and gems concealed in the body of the earth would be manifest unto him. He would let himself be borne through the air from the east to the west, and through all the opposed regions of the universe. But why should I proceed further? What thing is there which would not be effected by such an art? Nothing, save the discovery of immortality. And if it is true, why has it not remained among men who so greatly desired it, and led them to disregard any deity? And I know that there are many who to satisfy a whim would destroy God and the universe. And if necromancy has not remained with man, in spite of its being so necessary to him, it can never have existed, nor will it ever exist according to the definition of the spirit which is invisible in the body. For in the elements there are no incorporate things, for where there is no body, there is a vacuum, and a vacuum cannot exist in the elements, because it would be immediately filled by them. Deceptiveness of the senses. 104. The eye in its given distances and by its given means deceives itself in the performance of its functions less than any other sense, because it sees in straight lines which form a cone, the base of which is the object it perceives, and transmits it to the eye, as I intend to prove. But the ear greatly deceives itself as to the position and distance of the objects it apprehends, because the sonorous waves do not reach it in straight lines, like those of the eyes, but by tortuous and reflex lines, and often the most remote seem to be nearest, owing to the peregrinations of such waves, although the voice of the echo is transmitted to the sense by straight lines only. The smell is less certain of the spot whence the odor arises, but taste and touch alone come into direct contact with the object which they apprehend. On the conception of nothingness. 105. The smallest natural point is larger than all the mathematical points, and the proof of this is that the natural point has continuity, and everything which has continuity is infinitely divisible. But the mathematical point is indivisible because it is not a quantity. Every continuous quantity is mentally infinitely divisible. Among the magnitude of things which are among us, the chief of all is nothingness, and its function extends to matter that does not exist, and its essence is in time in the past or in the future, and it has nothing of the present. This nothingness has its part equal to the whole, and the whole to the part, and the divisible to the indivisible, and produces the same result by addition or subtraction, or if it be divided or multiplied, as is proved by arithmeticians by their 10th character, which represents nothing. And its power does not extend to the things of nature. That which is called nothingness is found only in time and in words. In time it is found in the past and future, and not in the present, and thus in words among things which are said to be non-existent or impossible. In time nothingness dwells in the past and the future, and not at all in the present, and in nature it resides among the things which are impossible. Whence from that which has been said it has no being, because where there is nothingness there would be a vacuum. On spirits. 106. With regard to this matter, we have said on the previous page that the definition of a spirit is a power united with a body, because it cannot move of its own accord nor acquire any kind of motion. And if you say that it moves itself, this cannot be within the elements, because if the spirit is an incorporate quantity, this quantity is a vacuum, and the vacuum does not exist in nature, and if it did exist it would be immediately filled by the rushing in of the element in which the vacuum was formed. So, according to the definition of weight, which runs, gravity is an accidental power created by one element attracted to or suspended in another, it follows that no element, weighing nothing in its own element, can have weight in the element which is above it and lighter than it. For instance, no one part of water has no more gravity or lightness than any other part, but if you were to draw it up into the air, it would acquire weight, and this weight cannot sustain itself by itself, and it must therefore inevitably fall, and thus wherever there is a vacuum in water, it will fall in. The same thing would happen with a spirit among the elements, where it would continuously generate a vacuum in whatever element it might find itself, for which reason it is inevitable that it would move in a constant flight to the sky until it had quitted these elements. Has the spirit a body? 107. We have proved that a spirit cannot exist in the elements without a body, nor move of itself by voluntary motion unless it be to rise upward. But now we will say that if such a spirit took a body made of air, it would inevitably melt into air, because if it remained united, it would be separated and fall and form a vacuum, as we have described above. Therefore, if it desired to remain in the air, it is necessary that it should blend with a quantity of air, and if it were united with the air, two difficulties arise, that is, that it will rarefy that portion of air with which it is mingled, and this rarefied air will fly upwards and will not remain in the air which is heavier than itself, and besides this, the ethereal spiritual essence is disunited, and its nature is changed, for which reason that nature loses some of its first virtue. There is in addition to these a third difficulty, and that is, that a body of this kind, made of air and assumed by the spirits, is exposed to the penetrating winds which continually sunder and scatter the united portions of the air, eddying and whirling amidst the rest of the atmosphere. Therefore, the spirit who would pervade this air would be dismembered or rent and broken up with the rending of the air of which it formed part. 108. It is impossible that the spirit, incorporated with a certain quantity of air, should move this air, and this is proved by the passage where it is said that the spirit rarefies that portion of the air with which it is mingled. This air therefore will rise high above the other air, and the air will be set in motion by its own lightness, and not by the volition of the spirit. And if this air encounters a wind, the air will be moved by the wind, and not by the spirit which is incorporated in it. Can the spirit speak? 109. In order to show whether the spirit can speak or not, it is first necessary to define the voice and the manner of its origin. The following will be our definition. The voice is the movement of air in friction against a dense body, or a dense body in friction against the air, which is the same idea, and by this friction of the dense and the rare, what is rare is condensed, and resistance is caused. And again, when the rare in swift motion and the rare in slow motion come into contact, they condense one another and produce sound, and a great noise is made. The sound or murmur made by the rare moving through the rare with slow motion is like the great flame whence sounds issue in the air. The exceedingly great noise made by the rare, when the air which is rare and swift mingles with that which is rare and in slow motion, is like the flame of fire issuing from a great gun and striking against the air. Likewise, the flame when it issues from a cloud strikes the air as it begets the thunderbolt. Therefore we will say that the spirit cannot produce a voice unless the air be set in motion. But since there is no air within, it cannot discharge what it does not possess, and if it wishes to move that air in which it is incorporated, it is necessary that the spirit should multiply itself, but that which has no quantity cannot be multiplied. In the fourth place it is said that no rare body can move if it has not a stable spot whence it may take its motion. And more especially is this the case when an element must move in its own element, which does not move of itself, excepting by uniform evaporation at the center of the thing evaporated, as occurs in the case of the sponge squeezed in the hand under water, whence the water escapes in every direction with equal motion through the space between the fingers of the hand which squeezes it. As to whether the spirit has an articulate voice and can be heard, and as to what are hearing and sight, the wave of the voice travels through the air as the images of objects travel to the eye. 110. O mathematicians, clear up this error. The spirit cannot have a voice, for where there is a voice there is a body, and where there is a body there is occupation of space, which prevents the air seeing what is behind that space. Therefore a body fills all the surrounding air, that is to say, with its own image. 111. There can be no voice where there is no motion or percussion of the air. There can be no percussion of the air where there is no instrument. There can be no such thing as an immaterial instrument. And this being so, a spirit can have neither voice, nor shape, nor force. And if it assumes a shape, it can neither penetrate nor enter where the issues are closed. If any one were to say that a spirit may take bodies of various shapes by means of concentrated and compressed air, and by means of this instrument speak and move with force, I reply to this argument that where there are no nerves or bones, no force can be expended in any movement made by these imaginary spirits. End of section 16.